So other than that, Mrs. Lincoln, how was the movie? All right, this is the Brothers Herman. We watched Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter, and here are our thoughts.
It's a movie about Abraham Lincoln fighting vampires. I really don't know how much more to describe it overall besides that.
Yeah, with a name like this, there are really only two viable ways this movie could have gone. It could have either been amazing or horrible, and either way, it would have been incredibly entertaining. Go in to be amazing and laugh at it because it's just so over the top and fun. Go in because it's so horrible you have to laugh. Both of those would be fine. I actually think this movie failed to hit its mark because it did the worst possible thing. It fell in between. It's on the good side. I'd give it a 7 out of 10, but it is not going in the collection.
Right, and I think I think the important thing to note about this is that even though it's a movie about Abraham Lincoln fighting vampires, at the same time, you can't just disregard a story, especially when you're taking yourself so seriously. There are plot holes in this movie that you could drive a tanker truck through. You can't ignore that. You can't just ignore the plot because you have a silly premise, especially when you're trying to take yourself seriously.
Right. I mean, there are ways of doing it. But you have to ignore the plot entirely, and they didn't. There are times, like you said, they take themselves seriously where they're way too focused on events. And then there's the countless times you hear the line,
"I'm sorry, we're through, Henry."
You can only hear that line so many times without payout. Without, thinking, oh, whatever. In fact, that entire character relationship was just mishandled in the extreme. It never really gelled.
There were rules. Because it was a mentor-student relationship.
Yeah, the guy who taught Lincoln how to hunt vampires. You didn't think he suddenly knew out of the blue, did you? And you didn't think this was a native part of being in Illinois. I learned how to chop down trees, and that makes me qualified to hunt vampires.
But how it was handled was so capricious because there were rules, but then half of them were followed sometimes, and then half of them weren't followed. One big one is revenge versus you can't hold a life of revenge, but that is disregarded half the time anyway. That's what all the rules are. It's just whenever I want to apply them, I'll apply them. Otherwise...
Yeah, the movie had serious pacing issues. There was bad setup between all the characters. I sound like I'm coming down really hard on this movie, and I kind of am, because it couldn't decide. It kept oscillating back and forth.
Yeah, it was the case where we were so disappointed because it was all right, but it wasn't great.
Right.
Where that's more disappointing than if it were just terrible.
Like I said, 7 out of 10. But it needed to be a 9, or it needed to be a 2. So, like, there are times where they dwell too much on what's going on with the characters. There are times where they don't show you important pieces of information. Give you an example. Lincoln has a couple of friends throughout the movie. In the end, one of them suddenly manifests awesome vampire hunting abilities. The other one doesn't. We neither see the first one training or the second one not. It's like...
and on that point, the villains of the movie, we both see them too often, we both see them very often, and we don't also know nothing about them. And I can see how you can get away with both of them. If this were a monster movie as opposed to Abraham Lincoln fighting vampires, and I mean like monster horror movie, then I could see why we know nothing about them. But if that's the case, we've seen them way too often in the course of the movie for that to make any sense.
We see them often enough to realize that the villains are kind of dumb. I mean, one of them, he's strongly hinted to be the first vampire, or at least the oldest vampire in the world, 5,000 years old. And his motivations are taking over what was at the time a moderately powerful country. That's it. I'm sorry. Look, yeah, you could argue that it's slightly disrespectful to say Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter, but we are talking about one of the greatest presidents that America has ever had. I think he deserved the dignity of a villain that was actually pretty cool, that was worthy of facing him on the field of battle with an axe. Maybe I'm just digging the hole deeper here.
Well, I guess the last point I want to make before we move on is that a lot of the times the movie couldn't decide whether it wanted to be heavy-handed or, hands-off approach, and it couldn't really find that middle ground where it led you down to where you needed to go without being too heavy-handed, and then going, "What a twist!"
Yes. To give an example, there's one character, his reactions, they keep highlighting them, they beat you over the head with them, and there's a payout, but it's like, why are you focusing so much on this? There are other things that happen in the movie that are a lot more subtle, so it's like, what were you doing? It's about as bad as the nature of the relationship between Henry and Abraham. It's like, it doesn't gel right. On the cinematography, there's good and there's bad. Good news, bad news. Good news, there is no shaky cam. Bad news, they didn't do this through good cinematography. They did this by inventing something new, which I'm going to call dusty cam. The two biggest scenes, and they are good scenes, okay? They're actually the most fun, over-the-top scenes in the movie. Oh, if the movie had been more like them, it would have been great. Two biggest scenes. One, dusty in the extreme. Other one, smoky in the extreme. And they used both of them to obscure some of the action so that they could skimp out on the choreography.
Honestly, it was those two scenes, but I thought because of that cinematography, the best done scene, the best part of the movie, in my opinion, was about the first 20 minutes up through the training montage. Because I thought that the training montage was the best done fight scene in the entire movie because there was no cinematography issues and it sort of highlighted what the movie was going for.
Right. Now, when they got into the really big stuff, and oh my God, is it such cheese, some of the stuff that happens. It's the payout you wanted to see from this movie. The problem is that they wanted, I don't know what their motivations were, but they wanted those scenes to be so big, and they just kind of skimped on the rest of the movie. And the scenes are so big and so over the top that you really could have afforded to spice up the movie because there was no way you were going to eclipse them. Oh, and before I forget, they, in addition to Dusty Cam, they pulled 300. And they were constantly doing I just scored an amazing hit, so I'm going to slow down time. I don't really have a problem with it, but and actually, in this particular context, if it had been a better movie, I would have been cheering it all the way because it's the kind of cheese that needed to happen. But
right. I guess the one other point I wanted to point out on the cinematography or film duration, besides those three scenes that we highlighted, every other fight. Well, okay, so there are four huge fight scenes. One of them being the training montage. Besides those four scenes, every other fight scene seems to be abbreviated, seen through some sort of montage, or it's just not given much, or it's mentioned after the fact. I mean, haven't we paid to see this movie because we want to see Abraham Lincoln kill vampires? We don't see that very often for the title of the movie.
Yeah. And in fact, so if we wanted to choose... don't get me wrong. We're not asking that they skimp on Abraham Lincoln's life. We're not saying, oh well, he didn't become president because he was too busy hunting vampires. We wanted to see that merged with him becoming president. The problem is it was almost like there were two separate sides to the movie, and they could never really mix them. So things that we think could improve the movie. To knock this one up from a 7 to at least an 8, possibly a 9. This movie really needed one-liners. Lincoln was known for being a great orator. It might seem a little silly, but he should have had more of the classic, after killing a vampire, just coming up with just a fun line. Or even, you could give it dignity. The point is, you needed something to make him a bit more action hero-like, a bit more over the top. By the same token,
I think one of the things that could have really improved this movie is upgrading Lincoln's arsenal, because I remember thinking throughout the course of that movie, yeah, it's great that you run around with an axe, but if you were some sort of world-class vampire hunter, the likes of which haven't been seen in 30, I don't know how many years, you think you could do better than wandering around within just one hunting axe, which, as is demonstrated throughout points in the movie, is really easily losable.
Yeah, I mean, seriously, you think vampire hunter, you think, okay, the guy's going to have a couple of daggers or stakes, a crossbow, a couple of guns. You can have the axe be the signature weapon without it being the only weapon. That is possible. That's easily possible. I mean, it's not like, I think of a lot of the people, it's not like Captain America fought only with a shield. It's not like Ash fought only with the chainsaw and the shotgun. The fact that those were signature weapons, yeah.
I think this, but the point where I'm trying to make, at least, is that it boils down to two really simple ways that could have been made better. I think the movie could have, A, either taken itself more seriously and focused more on the plot, or B, it could have taken itself less seriously, embraced its role as a sort of schlockfest, and be completely over the top, focus very little on the plot, and just get to Abraham Lincoln doing what the movie title says he was going to be doing.
Exactly. Things to watch out for. Well, I'd say I thought it was a flaw, but I actually looked it up, and or actually Stephen looked it up, and they actually got a couple of pieces of historical trivia in there right. For instance, one of Abraham Lincoln's chief rivals early on.
Yeah, the Douglas from the Lincoln-Douglas debate actually dated Mary Todd Lincoln before she started dating Abraham Lincoln. But still, I mean, I didn't know that.
That was actually a very nice touch. So I imagine there are others, you Lincoln historians out there, you probably will find a few. You will also probably find some real anachronisms, given that it is a movie about Abraham Lincoln hunting vampires. Bottom line, movie did not live up to its full potential. Oh, you got one other?
Right. No, go on.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Bottom line, the movie did not live up to its full potential. But it did prove that Abraham Lincoln absolutely knew how to mount a horse. This is the Brothers Herman, signing off. Oh, yeah, in case I didn't say, I'd recommend seeing the movie. It's fun once, but like I said, not going to go in the collection.
Don't buy the DVD.